The Book of Ceremonial Magic by Arthur Edward Waite. Chapter 1. The Antiquity of Magical Rituals and Manuscripts. The conventional domains of psychological investigation, predominantly under the stewardship of the pathologist, are skirted by a frontier of arcane and questionable experimentation into which pathologists may intermittently make incursions, yet it is abandoned principally to unmapped pioneers. Transcending these domains and this periphery lies the fabled realm of wonders known as theurgy, of magic and sorcery. A realm of enchantment or dread, contingent upon the disposition of the observing intellect, yet in either instance the very antithesis of acknowledged possibility. Therein all paradoxes appear to manifest tangibly, contradictions coexist with logical validity, the consequence exceeds the cause, and the shadow surpasses the substance. Within that sphere, the visible dissolves into the unobserved, the invisible is revealed overtly, locomotion between locations is achieved without traversing the intervening expanse, and matter penetrates matter. There, two linear parallels may encompass a void, space possesses a fourth dimension, and unexplored territories beyond it, and, sans metaphor or evasion, the circle is mathematically squared. Their existence is extended, youth revitalized, and corporeal immortality guaranteed. Their soil transmutes into gold, and gold into soil. Their vocables and aspirations command generative potency, thoughts manifest as entities, and desire actualizes its objective. There, furthermore, the deceased exist, and the hierarchies of extramundane intelligence are within facile communication, becoming ministers or tormentors, guides or destroyers of humanity. There, the law of continuity is abrogated by the intercession of the superior law of fantasia. Yet, regrettably, this dominion of bewitchment is in every regard analogous to the gold of fairy, which is presumably its currency of exchange. It cannot endure the light of day, the scrutiny of the human gaze, or the balance of reason. When these criteria are applied, its paradox devolves into an anticlimax, its antithesis becomes ludicrous, its contradictions appear devoid of genius, its mathematical prodigies terminate in a verbal quibble, its elixirs fail even as purgatives, its transmutations require no exposure at the assayer's hands, its miracle-inducing vocables prove to be barbarous mutilations of extinct tongues, impotent from the instant they are comprehended, and departed associates, or even planetary intelligences, must not be grasped by the skirts, for they are prone to abandon their draperies, and these garments resemble not the mantle of Elijah. The brief contrast established herein will serve to demonstrate that there exist at least two perspectives regarding magic and its mysteries. The simple and homogeneous view, prevailing within a charmed circle among the few remnants whom reason has not impeded from entering, and that of the exterior world, which is more complex, more composite, yet occasionally more rational only by imputation. There exists also a third perspective, wherein legend is verified by legend and wonder substituted for wonder. Here, it is not the law of continuity persisting in its formulae notwithstanding the law of fantasia. Rather, it is crochemetane elucidated by Diabolus, the runes of Elfland deciphered via the interpretation of Infernus. It is the law of bell and candle, the law of exorcism, and its ultimate expression is articulated in the terms of the act of faith. For this viewpoint, the wonder world exists without interrogation, save for that of the holy tribunal. It is not what it appears, but is adaptable to the eye of faith under the illumination from the lamp of the sanctuaries. In a word, its angels are demons, its Melusine striges, its phantoms vampires, and its spells and mysteries the black science. Herein magic itself ascends and retorts that there exists a black and a white art, an art of Hermes and an art of Canidia, a science of the height and a science of the abyss of Metatron and Belial. In this manner, a fourth perspective emerges. They are all, however, illusory. There is the positive illusion of the legend, affirmed by the residual adherence of its literal interpretation, the negative illusion which denies the legend crassly without considering the possibility resident behind it, the illusion which rationalizes the legend through an opposing hypothesis, and the illusion of the legend which reaffirms itself with a distinction. When these have been dispensed with, there remain two genuinely significant inquiries: the question of the mystics and the question of history and literature. To a substantial degree, the former is precluded from discussion, as the considerations it entails cannot be presented profitably on either side within the public assemblies of the literary sphere. Insofar as may be deemed possible, it has been addressed already. Regarding the latter, it constitutes the primary concern and objective of this investigation, and the parameters of its significance may therefore be articulated briefly. There can exist no extensive literatures without motives proportionate to account for their creation. If we examine the magical literature of Western Europe from the Middle Ages onward, we shall ascertain that it is moderately voluminous. Now, the operative principles in the generation of that literature will prove to govern also in its history. That which is obscure in the one may be comprehended by aid of the other. Each reacted upon the other. As the literature expanded, it assisted in forging the history, and the new history provided that much additional material for subsequent literature. There were, naturally, numerous motivating principles at work, for the literature and history of magic are alike exceedingly intricate, and there exist many interpretations of principles which are prone to be confused with the principles themselves, as, for instance, the influence of what is loosely termed superstition upon ignorance, and these, along with any such interpretations, must be excluded from an inquiry such as the present. The principal tenets are encapsulated in the conception of a plurality of assumed mysterious forces in the universe which could be operationalized by humanity, or at least tracked in their clandestine processes. Ultimately, however, they could all be rendered secondary, if not passive, to the human will. For even in astrology, which constituted the discernment of forces regarded as peculiarly fatalistic, there existed an art of governance, and the wise will rule over the stars became an axiom of the science. This conception culminated or centered in the doctrine of unseen, intelligent entities with whom it was possible for prepared individuals to communicate. The methods by which this communication was attempted constitute the most significant processes of magic, and the volumes that embody these methods, designated ceremonial magic, represent the most paramount portion of the literature. Here, that is to say, resides the singular branch of the subject which it is requisite to comprehend in order to grasp the history. Had magic been focused upon the reading of the stars, it would have possessed no history of note, for astrology involved intellectual apparatuses which, comparatively speaking, were accessible only to the few. Had magic centered on the transmutation of metals, it would never have stirred multitudes, but would have remained what it still is, the quixotic aspiration that emerges at a vast remove from the science of chemistry. We may consider the remaining occult sciences collectively, yet there is nothing inherent in them that would engender history. By virtue of the synthetic doctrine which has been previously formulated, they were all magically feasible, but they were all subsidiary to that which was the head and crown of all, the art of interacting with spirits. The presumed possession of the secret of this art rendered magic formidable, and therefore forged its history. There was indeed an epoch when ceremonial magic threatened to absorb the entire circle of the occult sciences. It was the superior method, the royal road. It effected immediately that which the others accomplished laboriously, after a protracted duration. It possessed, moreover, the palmary recommendation that it was a conventional art, operating via definite formulae. Above all, it was a process enacted through words. It was the captivating allure of this procedure that drew men and women, of every rank and station, to both the Black Sabbath and the White Sabbath, rendering them oblivious to the peril of the stake. It was the absolute and unequivocal acceptance of this process as efficacious by both church and state that ignited the faggots for the magician throughout every Christian realm. Astrology met with scant discouragement, and if the alchemist was occasionally subjected to torture, it was solely for the purpose of extricating his secret. In these pursuits, there lay no inherent danger, and consequently no condemnation was levied against them, save by imputation arising from their associations. Yet magic, the very act of trafficking with spirits, was that which caused even the peasant to tremble, and when the peasant shudders at his hearth, the monarch is not secure within his palace, nor the Pope at St. Peter's, unless both possess the power to protect their own. Moreover, in the very assertion of ceremonial magic, there existed an implied competition with the essential claims of the Church. The significance of ceremonial magic, and of the literature wherein it is embodied, to the history of the occult sciences being conceded, there is no necessity to argue that this history constitutes a legitimate and rational field of study. In such an instance, knowledge is its own objective, and there can certainly be no dispute regarding the distinguished influence that has been exercised by the belief in magic throughout the ages. To comprehend the literature of magic, however, it is requisite first of all to establish a clear principle regarding its interpretation. It would be superfluous to state that we must relinquish the legends, qua legends, to those who labor in that field, leaving them to dispute concerning their essential value. We need not debate whether magic, for instance, can truly square the circle as magicians testify, or whether such an operation remains impossible even to magic, as would commonly be objected by those who repudiate the art. We need not seriously discuss the proposition that the devil aids magicians in performing a mathematical impossibility, nor its qualified form, that the circle may be squared indifferently by those who invoke the angel Cassiel of the hierarchy of Uriel and those who invoke Astaroth. We shall ascertain very shortly, as previously indicated in the preface, that we are engaging with a bizarre literature, which transits, via various fantastic phases, through all manner of folly into actual crime. We are obliged to account for these characteristics. The desire to communicate with spirits predates history. It connects with ineradicable principles within human nature, principles which have been discussed too frequently to necessitate their recitation here, and the attempts to satisfy that desire have usually assumed a form that commits gross outrage against reason. Between the most ancient processes, such as those of Chaldean magic, and the rites of the Middle Ages, there exist marked correspondences, and there is something of a common doctrine, as distinct from intention where an identity would more or less obtain, underlying them both. The doctrine of compulsion, or the power which both forms pretended to exercise even upon superior spirits through the employment of certain vocables, serves as a case in point. In approaching the ceremonial magic of the Middle Ages, we must therefore bear in mind that we are dealing with a literature which, notwithstanding its modern presentation, embodies elements of profound antiquity. It is doubtful whether the presence of these elements can be accounted for on the principle that mankind in all ages labors unconsciously for the accomplishment of similar intentions in an analogous manner, A bizarre intention, naturally, tends independently to be fulfilled in a bizarre fashion. Yet in this instance, the similarity is so precise that it is more readily explained by the perpetuation, whether sporadic and natural or concerted and artificial, of an antique tradition, for which channels could readily be assigned. There exists one such channel upon the face of the literature, and that is the vehicle of Kabbalistic symbolism, although this cannot be held to bridge the entire distance in time. There have been two modes of regarding the vast and imperfectly explored literature which embodies the Kabbalah of the Jews, and these, in turn, provide two methods of accounting for the spurious and grotesque processes that enter so extensively into ceremonial magic. It is treated either as a barren mystification, a collection of supremely absurd treatises in which obscure nonsense is enunciated with preternatural solemnity, or it is regarded as a body of theosophy composed chiefly in the form of symbolism. The former view is that which is formed, I presume, almost irresistibly upon a superficial acquaintance, and there is scarcely any need to add that it is the one which generally obtains in derived judgments. For here, as in other instances, the second-hand opinion issues from the most available source. It is only just to add that this does not differ significantly from the opinions expressed in the past by a certain section of scholarship. The alternative judgment is that which prevails among those students of the literature who have approached it with a requisite preparation through acquaintance with other channels of the secret tradition. From the former, it would follow that the ceremonial magic which, at a long distance, draws from the Kabbalah merely reproduces its absurdities, possibly with further exaggerations, or constitutes the subject matter of that literature carried to its final results. Two erroneous views have issued from the latter, an exaggerated importance attributed to the processes in question on the grounds of their exalted connections, and, though this is rarely encountered, an inclination to regard them also as symbolical writing. There exists no ground for the criticism of the first inference, which has arisen legitimately enough and is that which will prove most acceptable to the majority of readers. Those who value Kabbalistic literature as a storehouse of symbolism, the inner sense of which is or may be of importance, but who perceive nothing in the processes of ceremonial magic to render them momentous in their literal sense or susceptible to interpretation, will be tempted to dismiss them as medieval and later impostures, which must be carefully distinguished from the true symbolical tradition. In either instance, the ceremonial literature is disdainfully rejected, and it follows in this manner that alternatives which exclude one another both reach the truth as their term. There exists, however, yet another point of view, and it is of some moment, as it connects with that question of the instituted mysteries regarding which it has already been observed that very little has transpired. Most students of occultism are acquainted with intimations and rumors concerning the existence in modern times of more than one occult, as of more than one mystical fraternity, deriving or believed to derive from other associations of the past. There are, naturally, many unaffiliated occultists, just as most mystics are unaffiliated. Yet the secret fraternities exist, and the keys of occult symbolism are purported to be in their possession. From a variety of isolated statements scattered throughout the works of professed occultists in recent years, it is possible to summarize broadly the imputed standpoint of these bodies in respect of ceremonial magic. I shall express it in brief as follows. There is no extant ritual, just as there is no doctrine, which contains or can possibly contain the true secret of magical procedure or the essence of occult doctrine. The reason, whatever may be asserted in the excess of some self-constituted exponents, is not because there is or can be any indicable process, but rather because the knowledge in question resides in the custody of those who have taken effectual measures for its protection. And though, from time to time, certain secrets of initiation belonging to this order have filtered through printed books into the world at large, the genuine mysteries have never escaped. The literature of magic falls, therefore, upon this hypothesis under three heads. First, the work of putative adepts, articulating as much as could be permissibly stated outside the circle of initiation, and primarily designed to attract those who might be sufficiently matured for entrance. Second, the speculations of independent inquirers, who, by thought, scholarship, and intuition, have sometimes attained veridic results without assistance. Third, travesties of occult doctrine, travesties of occult intention, and travesties of occult procedure, complicated by filtrations from the superior source. While the opinions of professed occultists on any subject whatsoever are of no significance to myself, and are cited solely to establish a perspective, it must be noted that the majority of ceremonial magic appertains to the third category. Proceeding on the assumption that it continues to exist, much like certain other avenues of Satanism, the first class is, by its very nature, unrepresented, and the second but slightly. In a word, ceremonial magic reflects principally the egregious ambitions and incorporates the frenzied processes of medieval sorcery, and of the Sabbath above all. The supplementary elements comprise debased applications of diverse Kabbalistic methods, scrying processes prevalent among the peasantry, and fantastic endeavors to reduce magical legends to a formal praxis. Whichever of the preceding views the reader may elect to adopt, it will be perceived that the net result regarding the rituals is not generically distinct. They possess literary and historical interest, yet nothing further. For the occultist, they will possess, by virtue of their associations, a significance that is of no consequence to another student. It is desirable that they should not be undervalued as records of the past, for they have exercised an influence and remain memorable as curiosities thereof. However, it is more desirable still that the weak and credulous should be cautioned against acting with folly, and that those seeking spiritual certitude should be dissuaded from the science of the abyss. The distinction between white and black magic. Having considered the potential standpoints from which the rituals may be regarded, we arrive now at the distinctions drawn between them, and, first and foremost, to that which has been previously mentioned and is artificially instituted between white and black magic. The history of this distinction is exceedingly obscure, yet there can be no question that, in its principal aspect, it is modern, that is to say, insofar as it relies upon a sharp contrast between good and evil spirits. In Egypt, in India, and in Greece, there was no commerce with devils in the Christian sense of the expression. Typhon, Juggernaut, and Hecate were no less divine than the gods of the overworld, and the offices of Canidia were, in their own manner, likely as sacred as the peaceful mysteries of Ceres. Each of the occult sciences was, however, susceptible to that species of abuse which is technically, though fantastically, designated as black magic. Astrology, or the appreciation of celestial influences in their operation upon the nature and life of man, could be perverted in the composition of malefic talismans through the agency of those influences. Esoteric medicine, which consisted of the application of occult forces to the healing of disease in man, and included a traditional knowledge of the medicinal properties resident in certain substances disregarded by ordinary pharmacy, produced in its malpractice the secret science of poisoning and the destruction of health, reason, or life by unseen forces. The transmutation of metals by alchemy resulted in their sophistication. In like manner, divination, or the processes by which lucidity was supposed to be induced, became debased into various forms of witchcraft, and ceremonial magic into dealing with devils. When we come, however, to compare the ceremonial literature of the two classes, we shall ascertain that the distinction is by no means so sharp as might be inferred from the definitions. In the first place, so-called theurgic ceremonial, under the pretense of white magic, usually includes rites for the invocation of evil spirits. Supposing that they are so invoked for the enforced performance of works contrary to their nature, the issue becomes complicated at once, and white magic must then be defined as the attempt to communicate with good or evil spirits for a good, or at least for an innocent purpose. This, of course, still leaves a tolerably clear distinction, though not one that I should admit, were I to admit the practical side of the entire subject to anything but unconditional condemnation. Yet the alternative between a good and an innocent object contains all the material for a further confusion. It will be elucidated as I proceed that the purposes and ambitions of magic are commonly quite puerile, so that we must distinguish really between black and white magic, not as between the essentially good and evil, but as between that which is certainly evil and that which may only be foolish. Nor does this exhaust the difficulty. As will also be made evident in proceeding, white ceremonial magic seems to admit of a number of intentions which are objectionable, as well as many that are frivolous. Hence it must be inferred that there exists no very sharp distinction between the two branches of the art. Cannot be said, even, that black magic is invariably, and white magic only occasionally, evil. What is denominated black magic is by no means invariably diabolical. It is almost as much concerned with preposterous and stupid processes as the white variety is with those of an accursed kind. Thus, the utmost which can be stated is that the literature falls chiefly into two classes, one of which usually designates itself black, but that they overlap one another. In what perhaps it may be permissible to term the mind of magic, as distinct from the effects which are proposed by the rituals, there has always existed a tolerable contrast between the two branches corresponding to magus and sorcerer, and the fact that the ceremonial literature tends to the confusion of this distinction may perhaps only stamp it as garbled. But this is not to assert that it has been tampered with in the sense of having been perverted by editors. White magic has not usually been written down into black, nor have goetic rituals been written up in pseudo-celestial terms. They are, for the most part, naturally composite, and it would be impossible to separate their elements without modifying their structure. Modern occultism has adopted the clear distinction and developed it. Appealing to the secret traditional knowledge behind the written word of magic, to that unmanifested science which it believes to exist behind all science, and to the religion behind all religion, as if the two were related or identical, it affirms that the advanced occult life has been entered by two classes of adepts, who have been sometimes fantastically distinguished as the brothers of the right and the brothers of the left, transcendental good and transcendental evil being specified as their respective ends. And in each case they are something altogether different from what is understood conventionally by either white or black magic. As might be expected, the literature of the subject does not bear out this development. But, by the terms of the proposition, this is scarcely to be regarded as an objection. For the rest, if many rumors and a few questionable revelations must lead us to concede, within certain limits, that there may have been some recrudescence of diabolism in more than one country of Europe, some attempt at the present day to communicate formally with the powers of darkness, it must be said that this attempt returns in its old likeness, and not invested with the sublimities and terrors of the modern view. Parisian diabolism, for example, inasmuch as its existence may be conceded, constitutes the black magic of the grimoire rather than the sovereign terror of the brothers of the left-hand path, who bear their iniquity as an aureole and remain immortal in spiritual malevolence. These enigmatical figures are, however, the fabrications of romance, as are their exalted, or at least purified, contemporaries. Between the Rosicrucian initiates of astral processes and the devotees of the devil, there exists indubitably a bond of union arising from a singular fact. There are no individuals more vexatious than these. The unprinted literature of ceremonial magic. For the purposes of the present inquiry, it will prove expedient to classify the rituals under the three categories of transcendental, composite, and black subject regarding the first, to specific qualifications which will be elucidated in the second chapter, and subject, respecting the whole, to the absolute comprehension that these three entities are fundamentally one. Insofar as it is feasible, the antiquity of individual rituals shall be ascertained during the course of their examination. Yet, as this inquiry is founded, with a singular exception of undeniable magnitude, upon printed literature, for that alone has exercised tangible influence, it is appropriate, as a conclusion to this introductory section, to provide intelligence regarding magical processes which have remained in manuscript form, and are extant only, or at least accessible for consultation, only within the public libraries of Europe. Almost without exception, the wellspring of their inspiration is the work cited in the preface, namely the Key of Solomon, and they are consequently of a subsequent date. The Library of the Arsenal in Paris possesses a reputation for being particularly replete with magical manuscripts. However, there exists also a substantial collection within the British Museum which may be regarded as typical. There appears nothing of earlier provenance or greater significance among the French treasures, and, to resolve the question of antiquity briefly, there is nothing among our own archives that significantly predates the commencement of the 14th century. The numerical volume of the treatises, combining both early and late eras, is in itself considerable. However, setting aside the codices utilized by the English editor of the Key of Solomon, the interest of which was long since exhausted by the publication of that work, there remain but three limited classes or cycles to which a particular appeal attaches in connection with the present inquiry. The first may be designated the group of Honorius, comprising 3 manuscripts. The second is that of the Seper Raziel, of which there exist 2 variations. The third encompasses the English codices of the Lemegeton. The principal manuscript of the first group is also one of the most ancient treatises concerning magic within the library. This is Sloane 313, a Latin manuscript upon vellum, currently in a deplorable state of preservation. The dense calligraphy and abbreviations render it somewhat arduous to decipher. It is noteworthy, however, as it connects with the Grimoire of Honorius, one of the most historical and prominent rituals of black magic, being the composition of an individual bearing that appellation. It pertains to the 14th century and possesses no title or other determinate designation. Yet, it appears from the text that it was recognized as the sworn book of Honorius. The introduction or prologue to the work is obscurely phrased in the initial pages, but it appears to account for the condemnation of magic by the prelates of the church on the grounds that they had been deceived by demons. The consequence is the convocation of all the masters of magic, numbering 811, all of whom appear to have originated from Naples, Athens, and a locale entitled Tholetus. Among these, a species of spokesman was selected, whose name was Honorius, the son of Euclides, master of the Thebans. He was deputed to labor on behalf of the remainder, and he entered into council with an angel named Hachmel or Hachroel, and subsequently composed 7 volumes of magical art, bestowing the kernel upon us and the shells upon others. From these tomes, He appears subsequently to have extracted 93 chapters, containing a summary of the entire subject, and consolidated them into a volume which we term the Sacred or Sworn Book. In the interim, the princes and prelates, having incinerated certain fables or trifles, concluded that they had completely annihilated the art and were thereby pacified. The magicians, however, swore an oath among themselves to preserve the masterpiece of Honorius in the most clandestine and meticulous manner, creating 3 copies at the most, the possessor of any exemplar being bound to bury it prior to his decease, or otherwise ensure its interment within his own grave, unless there existed some trustworthy and worthy individual to whom it could be transmitted. It is interesting to observe that this constitutes the law of transmission in respect of alchemy. The salient point regarding the manuscript itself is that it establishes the source of the mendacious tradition which ascribes a grimoire of black magic to a pope of the name of Honorius, as shall be demonstrated at length hereafter. The sworn book is not, naturally, the grimoire, but the existence and reputed authorship of the former will enable us to comprehend the attribution of the latter. Honorius the sorcerer was identified with Honorius the Pope, firstly by the confused mentality of magical legend, and secondly by conscious imposture, much after the same manner that Raymond Lully, the illuminated doctor of Majorca, was identified with Lully the alchemist by tradition at the inception, and not long subsequently by the aid of forged treatises. The sworn book is in other respects remarkable, and has been unaccountably overlooked by writers on ceremonial magic. It may be taken to indicate that an association of magicians was most probably in corporate existence during or prior to the 14th century. While it is clearly of Christian origin, it derives from the supposed works of Solomon, and would appear to indicate that the Solomonic cycle was at that time only in the course of formation, as also that the earliest elements approximate not to the grand clavicle, but to the little key otherwise known as the lemegeton. As to the operations contained in the sworn book, they are those of white and black magic, undiscriminated, without, however, any trace of the conventional pacts with the devil. The manuscript under notice need not, of course, be regarded as the original, as regarding this there is no means of ascertainment. The British Museum possesses also a later transcript, belonging to the 16th century, and a most valuable English translation, written on vellum in exquisite Gothic characters, which is referred to the 15th century. The second group comprises 2 manuscripts, both within the Sloane collection, and both containing, inter alia, the important and curious work attributed to Solomon under the title of Seper Raziel. That numbered 3826 belongs to the 16th century. It is an English translation of a Latin original which in this form is unknown to myself. The first line of the original is customarily presented at the commencement of each section. It is divided into 7 books, and purports to have been dispatched to Solomon by a prince of Babylon who was greater and more worshipful than all men of his era, his name being Sametun, while the 2 sages who conveyed it were named Camazan and Zazant. The Latin title of the treatise is said to be The Great Angel of the Secret Creator. It was the primary book following Adam, was written in the language of Chaldea, and was subsequently translated into Hebrew. It is a notable fact that in this work the first section is entitled Clavis, and if we may regard the Seper Raziel as antedating the clavicles, it elucidates why a key was attributed to Solomon. The clavis in question is, however, concerned with the magical influences of the stars, without which we can effectuate nothing. The second book is designated Allah. It treats of the virtues of stones, herbs, and beasts. The third volume is titled Tractatus Thymiamelum, a nomenclature that establishes a nexus with the sworn book of Honorius, and it discourses upon the subject of suffumigations. The fourth delineates the specific temporal periods, annual, diurnal, and nocturnal, that are favorable to operation. The fifth incorporates the statutes governing lust rations and abstinence, whereas the sixth, designated Samhain, elucidates the nature of the celestial spheres, the angelic hosts, and the operations pertinent to each. The seventh and final book addresses the virtues inherent in names. A Latin rendition of the Seper Raziel appears within Sloan manuscript 3853, which is attributed to an identical era. It diverges from the antecedent text in numerous significant particulars, being notably more concise and replete with obscure magical symbols. The manuscripts comprising the third classification are composed entirely in the English tongue and are of a late provenance. Sloan 2731 presents as an immaculately executed manuscript, commenced on January 10, 1676, and encompassing the complete Lemegeton or Lesser Key of Solomon in the English language. An examination of this renowned tome, which has so inexplicably eluded publication, shall be provided in the third chapter of this section. Sloan 3648 constitutes another manuscript of the Lemegeton, similarly in English, accompanied by the notorious art, a volume of invocations and orisons ascribed to Solomon, numerous exemplars of which are extant both in England and upon the continent. It is a composition that maintains a connection to magic without itself being inherently magical. Indeed, it bears a relationship to the key or clavicle analogous to that which the handbook of Pope Leo bears to the isagogy of the arbatel. Finally, this same manuscript includes the magical orthodoxies of Paracelsus. However, the version appears wholly distinct from the treatise bearing that title within the Geneva Folio, which houses the collected corpus of the German adept. In any event, it does not constitute a work of ceremonial magic, its nomenclature notwithstanding. Sloan 3805 is a quarto manuscript, predominantly alchemical and medical in nature, comprising a translation of the spurious epistles of Sendivogius, and, toward the conclusion, the Lemegeton, initiated by the scribe ostensibly with the intent of transcribing all works attributed to Solomon under the rubric of this angelic appellation. It terminates abruptly, however, at the conclusion of the offices concerning the 13th spirit of the infernal hierarchy. It must be noted that these three groups encompass materials common to them all. The independent treatises succeeding the Seper Raziel in Sloan 3826 derive substance from the Sworn Book. Meanwhile, the text entitled Book Monday, concerning the intelligences of the lunar mansions, the planetary squares, their seals, rings, and similar matters, which, incidentally, appears in this configuration to be unknown to modern critics, has furnished material for other and subsequent collections. The unpublished literature of ceremonial magic presents a substantial field for research, although even within historical or bibliographical contexts, it remains debatable whether the effort would be requited, unless inquiry of every variety is to be considered its own reward. Among the miscellaneous manuscripts residing within the British Museum, it is requisite here to note but two, as they contain materials pertinent to the present design. Sloan 3884 includes a process in necromancy regarding the evocation of the ghost of a cadaver, the invocation of spirits into a crystal, the formula for summoning spirits within the circle, and a method of exorcism in the Tuscan tongue, all audaciously attributed to the author of The Nullity of Magic, which is to say, Roger Bacon. In the second portion of my current opus, a specific chapter is dedicated to infernal necromancy, and the manuscript herein cited shall prove advantageous for purposes of reference. Sloan 3850 is a manuscript of the 17th century, containing transcripts from the fourth book of Cornelius Agrippa and from the Heptameron of Peter de Abano in Latin. There exists also a good and proved experiment for evocation, which utilizes the Pater, Ave, Credo, and the Litany of the Saints as magical formulae. Finally, there are processes, predominantly in Latin, though some in English, for the discovery of lost items, the recovery of stolen goods, the aid of spirits of the dead unable to find rest in their graves, and the relief of persons possessed by malevolent entities. The treatise of the 9 Candards of Solomon, containing curious figures and sigils, merits particular mention, as this too appears unknown to students. Its attribution notwithstanding, it is the work of a Catholic author. Chapter 2. Transcendental Magic and the Arbatel. The appellation transcendental must not be construed in any elevated or philosophical manner when employed, with sufficient informality and convention, in a context such as the current one. It has been selected not by virtue of its tolerable appropriateness, but rather owing to the dearth of a superior definitive term regarding the implied claim, and furthermore, because it has previously been admitted within this identical association. It corresponds, perhaps loosely, to the high magic of Eliphaz Levi, which I have translated as transcendental magic, not as a wholly satisfactory synonym, but because there exists no contemporary or accepted expression that correlates with greater precision. Once due allowance has been granted for the conceptions presumed to underlie the subject, one must assert that within ceremonial magic there resides as much, and as little, transcendentalism as is found within the phenomena of modern mediumship. Regardless of the claims advanced on behalf of the intelligences with whom communication is sought, they disclose their nature through their offices, which are invariably either fantastic or frivolous. In such a classification, it should be comprehended that material interests fall within the latter category. The former comprises those objectives which lie beyond realization by virtue of their extravagance, while simultaneously remaining distinct from spiritual aspiration. Even assuming it were an exact science, there would exist nothing within practical magic that interlinks, for instance, with a genuine or indeed any mystic purpose. Consequently, by the phrase rituals of transcendental magic, one must not infer a collection of processes whereby the divine in man is sought to be united with the divine in the universe. The writings of St. John of the Cross, of Rusbroek, of Eckhart, of Molinos, of St. Martin, and even the Imitation of St. Thomas à Kempis, these embody the grand processes of true transcendental magic, were it not a desecration to apply a term, which is worse than ludicrous, to treasures that would be disparaged by such an association. Herein, one must understand simply those occult processes and that so-called theurgic ceremonial wherein there exists at least no explicit connection with black magic. These not only involve no dealings with malevolent spirits for nefarious ends but appear to eschew all such communication, for whatever purpose. An exception which, when properly analyzed, remains an exception only superficially, should be advanced in favor of the procedure adopted by the Church for the expulsion of diabolical powers from persons in the flesh. This is not because the phenomena of possession are necessarily other than pathological, even in instances appearing distinct and obstinate, but because, upon the terms of ecclesiastical assumption, the rite of exorcism constitutes a far more exalted rite than anything obtaining within transcendental magic. In this matter, as in numerous other instances of far greater import, no tolerable justice has been rendered to the position of the Catholic Church. It should additionally be observed that while ceremonial magic concerns itself with a variety of processes that may obviously tend to induce, in unwary operators, the phenomena characterizing possession, there exists scarcely a single process in any of the rituals, white or black, composite or transcendental, that makes any pretense of relieving persons so afflicted. There is, therefore, no reason to doubt upon which side of hallucination the apparatus of the rituals has been developed. Consequently, the sympathies of reasonable scholars will reside with the honorable institution that condemned the practices and sought to liberate the victims, leaving possession itself as an open question, and in this sense a collateral issue. Even with the qualification I have registered, the putative transcendental rituals are exceedingly few. They include the Handbook of Pope Leo III, the Arbitel of Magic, and the Celestial Magic of an anonymous German occultist entitled Pneumatic Theosophy, which must be held to represent and obviate the enumeration of one or two similar handbooks. Of these, the first is included among the rituals of ceremonial magic by the invincible ignorance of nearly every individual who has undertaken to classify it. Conversely, the third derives its entire importance from the second, in which, upon both counts, the interest evidently centers. Regarding its origin, its authorship, and even its scope, however, there exists considerable mystery. Within my own purview, there exist no copies in manuscript, or at least none anteceding the close of the 16th century. It appeared in a diminutive volume at Bâle, bearing the date 1575. Retroactive dating and imputed authorship constitute the two egregious bibliographical sins of grimoires and magical handbooks. Consequently, the antiquity of the Arbitel rests under a certain suspicion on account of its literary connections, while simultaneously, it would require the acumen of an expert in typography to pronounce with certainty upon the reliability of the indicated date. The text is composed in Latin, yet there exists a slender possibility in favor of its being the work of an Italian. It references theophrastic magic, which indicates the influence of Paracelsus, and although it is difficult to speak with certitude, it appears to allude to an early phase of that influence, the period, in fact, of Benedictus Figulus, slightly antedating Rosicrucian enthusiasm. This accounts for the omission of all Rosicrucian references, which, in view of both matter and manner, might have been irresistibly expected had the work been posterior to the year 1610. It should be observed that the Arbitel possesses no connection with the cycle of the Keys of Solomon, considered hereinafter, and it is permeated with Christian concepts. The authorship remains completely unknown. Arbitel is likely not a pseudonym, but rather indicative of an instructing or revealing angel. The employment of this Hebrew term is, however, peculiar in conjunction with the fact that references to the Old Testament are few and inconsequential, whereas the sayings of Christ and the New Testament narrative generally are subjects of continual citation. Solomon, moreover, is not mentioned in the frequent enumerations of adepts and sages. Thus far regarding the origin, authorship, and date of the volume. It remains to be stated that the work is incomplete. Of the 9 tomes into which it purports to be divided, we possess but one. It is not improbable that the remainder were never composed, for the author has bequeathed us a plan of his entire proposal, and it is evident that his first book overlaps, more than once, that which should have followed. As it stands, the Arbitel of Magic concerns itself with the most general precepts of the magical arts, in other words, with the institutions. It is entitled Isagogy, which signifies essential or fundamental instruction. The missing books are those of microcosmical magic or spiritual wisdom, Olympic magic, that is, the evocation of the spirits of Olympus, Hesiodiacal and Homeric magic, being the operations of evil demons, Roman or Sibylline magic, concerning tutelary spirits, Pythagorical magic, dealing with the genii of the arts, the magic of Apollonius, granting power over the enemies of mankind, Hermetic or Egyptian magic, and finally, that which depends solely on the Word of God and is termed prophetical. Magic. It remains an open question whether all of these tomes could have been completed without a proportion of that dangerous instruction which contributes to overt black magic. The isagogy, however, must be exempted in part from such a charge. The 7 septenaries of aphorisms of which it consists contain many moral and spiritual exhortations. These, if not precisely novel, are on the surface quite unexceptionable, and might indeed rank among the more exalted of their kind, were it not for the art with which they are associated. The initial series of these aphorisms functions as an exordium to the ritual of the Olympic spirits, who abide in the firmament and the stars thereof, and among whom the governance of the world is distributed. There exist 196 Olympic provinces throughout the entire universe. Consequently, Eratron commands 49, Bader 42, Phaleg 35, Ak 28, Hagith 21, Ophiel 14, and Fool 7. These provinces are designated as visible, yet, much as the 7 septenaries of the Arbatel encompass the entirety of reputed transcendental magic, these 7 successive multiples of the identical mystical integer may, in all likelihood, be interpreted as indicative of specific powers and offices. It is further asserted that the Olympic spirits exercise dominion successively, each for a period of 490 years. A proposition that would result merely in chaos were separate assemblages of spheres permanently assigned to them. The powers possessed by these intelligences are delineated in a most peculiar manner. While they exercise natural dominion over specific departments and operations of the material world, they perform these identical operations magically when acting outside those distinct boundaries. Thus Ak, the prince of solar concerns, presides over the natural preparation or development of gold within the subterranean veins of the earth, signifying his role as the chief mineralogist of nature. He governs, furthermore, the accelerated preparation of the same metal through chemical artifice, establishing him as the prince of alchemists, and ultimately he generates gold instantaneously through magic. It is by this method that ceremonial magic connects with Hermetic art, even while presuming to transcend it. There exists another curious instruction regarding the names and characters of the spirits. Contrary to much of the traditional doctrine of magic, it is affirmed that there resides no inherent power in the figure of any character, nor in the pronunciation of any name, save insofar as there is a virtue or office ordained by God to both. Moreover, the names are neither definite, final, nor real, whence they differ among various authors according to the manner of their reception. The only efficacious names are those delivered to an operator by the spirits themselves, and even in such instances, their efficacy seldom endures beyond 40 years. Consequently, the Arbatel advises that it is preferable for the student to operate solely by the offices of the spirits, irrespective of their names. Should he be preordained to attain the art of magic, the remaining components of that art will manifest of their own accord. The sources of occult wisdom, the text proceeds to explain, are situated firstly in God, secondly in spiritual essences, which is to say, the angelical hierarchy, thirdly in corporeal creatures, this reference likely being an allusion to the signature of things of Paracelsus. Fourthly, in nature, signifying a knowledge of the secret virtues of natural objects, such as herbs and precious stones. Fifthly, albeit after a significant interval, in the apostate spirits reserved for the last judgment. Sixthly, in the ministers of punishment in hell, a concept appearing to align with the classical conception of avenging infernal deities. And seventhly, in the inhabitants of the elements, namely the salamanders, sylphs, undines, and gnomes or pygmies. The secrets derived from these sources range from the supreme achievements of reputed mystical science to the bourgeois ambitions of daily existence. From the regeneration of Enoch and the knowledge of God, Christ, and His Holy Spirit, wherein lies the perfection of the microcosm. Do you want access to this and all the complete audiobooks on the channel, plus the ebook version? Click the link in the description or scan the QR code in the left corner of the screen to access our library, where you can listen to your favorite esoteric books without ad interruptions, lock your screen, or use other apps while the narration plays, and even download the ebook version to follow along as you listen. Listen on your computer via web browser, or download the app from the Play Store. After subscribing, you will receive an email with your login details, password, and step-by-step instructions on how to access the books through the Hotmart app.